right, I think we'll get started. My name is Ken Watson. I'm the Assistant Director of Chicago Child Care Society, which is a child welfare agency in Chicago, one of whose services is adoption. And right now, I'm more than that, and I'm very proud of it. I'm a board member of AAC. I'm delighted to be at the conference and delighted to be on the board. This is sort of a follow-up session to the opening session and to the session we just heard. I hope everybody heard Ms. Ivanek. That's powerful material, and I really find it very moving because we're talking about bringing change about, and she says, yes, it can be done, and we need that message, and we need the know-how. What I would like to spend the time this morning on is to tell you a little bit about agency change within my agency, and then I really want to make this into a workshop and find out what is happening. So to begin, before I do that, I need to know what kind of an audience we have in terms of whom you represent only. How many people here are social workers working in social work adoption type agencies? Raise them high. All right, you folks are really going to have to get involved with me because I want you to tell me and the group what changes are happening and what changes are needed in your agency. Now, the rest of you, I presume, are here because you would like to help agencies change, and I'm going to rely on that balance. So we're going to have some of the healthy tension and discussion in this group, I hope, that affects change and brings it about. And we're going to see where we can coalition, is that a word? Where we can make coalitions and where we can't. And if you heard me speak on Thursday, one of the things that had the most powerful impact on me was the opportunity to feel the pressure from the outside, because that's what helps you begin to change. You know, you scratch when it itches. And if you don't have an itch from the inside, then you need a mosquito buzzing around to say, hey, move, get going. You're going to have to itch from one way or the other. So if you don't feel the inner pressure, then it's important to feel the outer pressure. And it is that balance that causes institutions to move and that causes people to move. The alternate title of my paper this morning, which I didn't use because it was too facetious, or my remarks, it's not a paper. Don't worry. Wake up. It's all right. Was not only what can agencies do, but how to live to be 141, because the agency at which I work is 141 years old. So that I suggest that facetiously because it means that we must be doing some things right to live to be that old, because you cannot live without changing. So that in a sense, any institution or agency is under constant pressure to change, and as I have said and Mary said, also under pressure to maintain the equilibrium, because you have to do both things. If you don't have some balance, you'll go out of business. If you have nothing but balance and you concrete things, people say, let's institutionalize our program. What that says to me is you frame it in some way that it can't move, so that you don't want to institutionalize it, nor let it be so diffuse that it goes nowhere and you die from chaos. I'd like to try to move right away to the active part of this, and being active, and not deal too much with conceptual ideas, because I think I tried to deal with some of those earlier and we heard some from Mary. I'd like to talk about where we are and what we can do. In preparation for that, however, I would like to review for you what I think are the essential ingredients for agency or institutional change. The first, and again we heard this from Mary, is that the higher the approval and sanction, the quicker the change. So you want to try to get sanction, approval, initiation from change from the top of your organization. Now that does not mean if you're on the bottom layer you can't change. I'm going to paraphrase something that Mary said because I liked it. She said that in a sense that change always begins with one, but one person can never bring it about. So you can be the one, but don't ever think you can do it by yourself. The second principle of organizational and institutional change is that once you start changing, this is the system approach, a little change here brings change all about. So that not only do you need to anticipate that your little effort is going to make a difference, but you need to prepare your organization for that, and you do it through communication. I was talking with Mary Pat Clements just a few moments ago, and I'm going to tell a story that she just told me which troubled, moved, bothered, impressed me. She was talking, she had an experience, and I hope I'm getting it right, Mary Pat, correct me or if I go too far astray. If I distort it a little bit, that's all right. That's, you know, poetic license for impact. But she had a child, an adopted child, on a panel with her, talking with her about that adopted child's experience. And this was a child who had spinal bifida. And Mary Pat asked the child, what was the difference from your experience in the hospital and from your experience in the social welfare and the child welfare system? How was it different from you? And the answer was telling and frightening. The people in the hospital always told me what was going to happen, explained the procedures to me, got my opinions and involvement, and asked me if I thought I could handle it and how they could help me handle it better. And the people in the child welfare system never did that. Now, isn't that a terrible indictment of the child welfare system? It really makes me want to weep. It really does. That we involve and move children around and make decisions for them without communicating. And likewise, if we put that into the context of what we're talking about today, if you're going to change your agency, and I hope you are, because those agencies need to be changed, and people both in and out are the people that are going to change it, communicate what you're doing. We have had enough secrecy. We have had enough deviousness. We've had enough, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do, but are you going to be surprised when this agency changes? Not only are they going to be surprised, they're going to fight you to the end. So we don't need that. Communicate with people. Tell them what you're about, what you're trying to do. Change comes about through communication, not through secrecy. This is not the OSS. There isn't any OSS anymore. What is it called now? Whatever George Bush used to be the head of? CIA. Yeah, I think he's still the head of it. Speaking of failure to communicate, huh? Now, our government is a perfect example in terms of failure to communicate. It is a perfect example. And think how angry it makes us that so much of the government is wrapped in secrecy, and we feel manipulated. And don't be guilty. We've manipulated our clients if we're agency people. Let's don't manipulate our staff as we try to bring about change. The third thing is that any change anywhere, this is a further point on the system, any change anywhere demands a review and policy changes and a reevaluation of all aspects of your program. Was it Kate Burke said this morning that adoption has developed, the system of adoption has developed as a sort of a knee-jerk response to the current emergency. And what that means is that people have not anticipated that when you begin to change something here, the whole system has to change. And by anticipating that and by evaluating what may happen, you begin to prepare for it. The fourth characteristic condition for institutional change, I believe, is to recognize that your most important resource in bringing about any change is the individuals that are involved and their willingness to examine themselves, to be respectful of divergent opinions, and to continue to try to work together. Because there is, in the nature of change, an inherent divisiveness. Do you know what I mean? Every time you say, I'm going to change something, somebody's going to say, that's a good idea, and somebody else is going to say, over my dead body. And that's all right, because that's the way change occurs. And you don't want to then immediately polarize yourselves. I'm not going to talk to those no-good-nicks. They don't even believe what I'm trying to do. Or I'm certainly not going to have lunch with her because she's trying to change the agency. It's that divergence of opinion that we have to respect and realize that the capacity for change lies in all of us, and that it is only as we can communicate and work together that we can negotiate, compromise, find where we want to do. And I want to talk a little more about compromise too. If the next point is, if we're going to have communication, the best way to organize that in an institution is on two tracks: formal channels of communication and informal tracks of communication. You need to have a formal way for people to present ideas, to present concerns, to present criticism, and you also need to, as administrators or agency people, sanction the informal route. Because you don't want to say, well, if you've got a complaint, file it through the grievance committee and it'll work its way up. That's fine. You need to have that because it needs to be documented and on track. But you also need to be very aware administratively of what the other route is. Where is the grapevine in your agency? How does information really get communicated? Every agency has what I would call, among this group, among friends, an agency gossip, what I would call more formally an agency switchboard. There is some one person or persons in your agency who knows things and who tells things and people trust and pass messages through. Who's that person? And if that person's not in your formal chain of communication, then you better have some access to the informal chain if you want to know what's going on. And of course, once you, as a good administrator, once you see where the informal line of communication is, then you want to try to sanction it. It's like if there's an example, and you've all seen this, a church built a new church on the corner of the street where I live. And there was a big grassy spot on the corner. Well, you know immediately what happened. They no sooner planted the grass than people started walking across catty corner to get from one place to the other, and they were wearing a little path. Now what they didn't do, they were foolish, and I would have done it perhaps if it had been my church. They resodded it. Well, you know, a week later the sod was gone. Then they dug the sod up and they put a little low bush at each end. Well, of course, anybody could step over that bush. That didn't work. Not only that, the bush got trampled down, you know, but they haven't learned. They're so set on you are going to walk on my path rather than how do I make... Well, to make a long story short, they ultimately put a pathway across where people were walking. And it solved their problem. The yard is lovely, people have a shortcut across, and everybody's happy. So you need to think about in your agency, where are the shortcuts in communication, and how can I sanction them and make people communicate easier, not block communication. You don't want to try to block communication. Even the worst things about the organization are the very things you need to hear. Again, we don't want secrets within an organization. I've lost track, but the next condition for change in terms of numbers, I know where I am, but I've got them lettered. What number is letter F? A, B, C, D, E, F. Thank you. F. So likewise with the communication, you need an organized method for the expression of resistance and the resolution of job-related conflicts. You need to make it clear to folks that if they disagree with you, there is a formal, organized way they can express that. Because if you don't, how will they express it? Informally. And what's informal resistance? Sabotage. So that you want to make sure that you don't expect everybody to agree with me. If I have a new idea and everybody agrees with me, hey, something is awfully wrong. Either the idea is not new or the people that I'm talking to are not listening. I mean, you just don't expect that to happen. So you need to have an opportunity in a way for this grievance or this resistance to be expressed. And finally, only on this list you see, I'm not ending, it's not 12:30. Finally, the change occurs most easily in a constant climate of continuous change, of reevaluation. Now that means that the agencies who are functioning most successfully, in my opinion, are on the edge of chaos. And I would like to, if I write a paper about agency administration, that would be the title of it, The Edge of Chaos. Because if you are not on the throes of chaos, and if everything in your agency isn't almost chaotic, then it means there's not a constant commitment to change. You see, now you don't want to fall off the edge, and many of us think we're in agencies where that's true. But I think fatal words in an agency, and every now and then I hear them, I have heard them in my agency, and it troubles me. Those are the people I go after when they say it's time that we stop for a minute and integrate what we've got and pull everything together and consider what we're going to do next. No, do that on the run. You know, do all those things, but don't do that, because that's the beginning of pulling back and holding back, and it's as if, don't give me any new ideas, I've got more now than I can deal with. Give me more ideas. I've got more than I can deal with. Give me some more. Yours may be better, I may abandon mine, and together we may form something that will work. But it's the edge of chaos, which means that for workers to survive in an agency that's on the edge of chaos, what does it take? What does it take? It takes a committed, secure administration who says it's all right. We're not out of control. So that means that for administration, there has to be a commitment to change and to being on the edge of chaos, balanced with the sense of organizational sureness, of personal security, of nurture for staff, of listening to staff, of listening to what people are saying that says it's all right. This is a busy family with a lot going on in it, but we're not going to fall apart. Welcome the busyness, welcome the chaos, and communicate not the structure, but the security that comes with knowing that change is good. Now, I'm going to let you talk. And I think what I would like to do first is to move the focus to risk, because I talked a little bit about that and I didn't have a chance to say it, and I think Mary again implied it. If you want to bring about change in your agency, you people who live in agencies or work in agencies, when you want to think about the change you're bringing about, it seems to me the question or the area that we flirt around is this area of risk. And how much risk can I take, and what's going to be gained and what's going to be lost. So let's just take a quick peek at that. I think that you have a series of questions to ask yourself when you begin to embark on change. What is the worst that can happen? The worst scenario thing. Now you say, why start with the worst? Because you start with where your anxiety is. In order to allay anxiety, you begin with where it is. What is that you fear most about trying to initiate this change? Is it I will lose my job? Is it that I will lose prestige in the agency? Is that I'll be called crazy? Is that everybody will join me and I won't know how to handle it? What is the thing that you are concerned or worried about? The second question is, if you've decided what the worst thing is in your mind that can happen, the question you ask yourself is, can I endure it? And related to that, and this question comes next and almost in the same breath, is, can I prevent that worst thing from happening? If I know, if I anticipate it, if I can endure it, or if I can't endure it, either way, can I prevent it? Then you're in a position to begin to see, I haven't asked the question is, what is the change going to accomplish? Because if you're committed to change, those issues have already been settled. You're now talking about what the price is you're going to pay. The next question is, what are the chances that this worst thing will happen? What are the odds? You now start figuring the odds. That's the worst thing. I don't think I can endure it. I may be able to prevent it. I do think I can endure it. I think I can prevent it. What are the odds? And then the final question, are you willing to risk it? Now let me take you through a very quick scenario, and I mentioned this again Thursday, and I'll build on it. My agency, I've been very embarrassed by the fact that although we pioneered in developing post-legal adoption services in our community and among the early pioneers in the country, we never formally identified a post-legal adoption position and funded it. Do you follow what I'm saying? So everybody that's been doing all our post-legal adoption service has been doing it on short-term contract, or we have been borrowing their time from other areas where they are supposed to be doing other work. And I have not been able to persuade my board that this is a bona fide, fundable position and service that we need to put in place. Now, Minnesota Children's Home Society has had such a position, such a department for 15 years. So the first thing I did was say, other agencies are doing this. They got a whole unit up in Minnesota, and my board said, fine, we're not going to do it. We can't afford it. All the reasons, all the resistance. Well, you keep, as I said Thursday, presenting this, and as Mary said so eloquently today, you go back, non corporandum illegitimus. Wear the bastards down. I mean, you just keep going back, until something gives way. Now, all the time I'm thinking, what are the stakes and how high am I willing to go? And I found myself saying, in a public meeting, talking about this whole issue, right, Pat may have been there, I found myself saying out loud that you cannot tolerate a board or you cannot tolerate a social agency that says, I cannot afford post-legal adoption services, because that means that you are saying that services ends when the adoption is consummated. And I don't believe that. And if you don't believe it, then how can you tolerate not providing those services? And as I said at the meeting first publicly, that if a board says that, you've got to go back and tell them, then you cannot afford to do adoption services, period. Because if you can't afford that piece, give it up. Well, having said that in public, I said, gulp. Am I really willing to go back and tell my board that? Am I really willing to say to them, if we don't do those services, then we should give up our adoption program? And I went through this list. You know, what's the worst thing that could happen? They'll say, fine, give it up. And can I live with that? Can I endure that? And what are the options for me? If they really said that, what would I do? Would I stay at that agency and participate in other services with the hope that maybe I could reinstitute adoption? That would be one option. Would I move to another agency? I had to weigh what the possible plans were. How could I prevent this? How can I prevent their saying, okay, give it up? Because I didn't want to say that unless I was prepared for the possibility, the worst outcome. But how am I going to prevent them from saying that? Well, I'm going to build my base. I'm going to find my allies. I'm going to find the people in the board that I think, I'm going to tell them I'm going to say that, and they're going to say, oh my God, and I'm saying, fine, you know, I'll count on you to support me. First, for my executive, I'm the assistant executive in my agency, and my executive and I get along beautifully. He sometimes thinks I'm a little wild, and so be it. You know, that's what I'm paid to be, in a sense, in that agency. Some of the board people feel that way. But I have my allies, and I've been there a long time, you know. Not only has the agency been around 141 years, I've been there 140. No. I have been at that agency for 25 or 26 years, so they're not going to fire me. You see, that isn't the risk. They're not going to fire me. And they're probably not going to ask for my resignation. If they haven't already for a number of other things, they aren't for this. But there are risks. How do I prevent it? Well, I build my allies. Who's on my side? How do I do this? And I talk to my boss, and he becomes my ally, and we decide what committee's on the board to run it through. We'll go through the program committee first, then we'll go to the executive committee, then we'll go to the board. Now, there are other routes I could have taken in the agency. I could have gone to the finance committee first. I could have taken it directly to the executive committee. I could have presented it to the board, the whole board. I'm going to start with the program committee, who know the program best and on where I know I have some allies. The question is, where's the money going to come from? You know, that's the question the finance committee is going to ask. So with the program committee, I say, after they say, yeah, this makes sense, well, how are we going to handle the finance committee when they say, where's the money going to come from? And then we begin to generate some ideas and how we're going to afford this. And what I did, I made a compromise. Always be ready to compromise. And it's a fair compromise, but I'm going to win. I'm only asking for money to fund this program for 2 years. Now, what's going to happen? And they know it, and I know it. At the end of 2 years, we're going to be so caught up in it that they can't possibly not fund it after that. If we're not, then probably we should give our adoption service up. Do you see? It's a trade-off. They're going to fund it for 2 years, so that's not such a big chunk of money. We're not building in a new position. We're not building in hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next 10 years for the service, but of course we are. Because as we begin to get it established and develop and prove its worth, it's going to develop that way. The program committee knows that. And again, no secret. So I say, let's tell the executive committee that's exactly what we expect to happen. So we're not going to pretend that this is only going to be 2-year funding. I'm going to be up front, and I say it's 2-year funding. That's all I'm asking for. But look out. It's exactly what I said to the executive. Look out. Because this is going to prove such an important part of our program that after 2 years, no one on the staff or none of you are going to be able to tolerate to give it up. So I'm asking for 2 years, but understand that I'm so committed to this and I think it's so important that once it's established, this is not something you're going to want to give up. And that's, again, I made my choice in terms of what the chances are. Well, when I was reasonably comfortable and reasonably sure that they weren't going to say, we'll give up our adoption program, I was prepared to move ahead. But understand I had already prepared in my own mind my contingency plans. If they did do that, I knew what I was going to do, and that was a personal decision, which of the several courses of action I could take. But my odds were, I thought, almost overwhelming in favor of the approval. Now, I'm through program committee, I'm through executive committee. Next Tuesday, I present it before the full board. And there are other things that are coming up before the full board too. And I think that with the approval of the program and the executive committee, well, I can only think of one time in the 26 years I've been there that the full board voted something down that had been approved by 2 other committees. So, you know, my odds are 99% at this point. So next week at this time, we will have a funded position for 2 years for a full-time program. Now that's just an example of how the risk thing works. Do you see what I'm saying? And also ties in, and you know, one uses personal examples, not because I think I do everything right, but because I don't know how else to do it except to tell you what has happened with me, both what's worked and what hasn't worked. All right, enough of that. Now what I would like us to talk, and first I'm going to address the people in the agency, in the audience who are agency people, and please respond, because if you don't, we might as well unplug and go home. Think first. I'm going to ask you the same thing. Think it, keep it to yourself. Don't say it out loud, but I am going to ask you to say it out loud in a minute. At least somebody will have to start. Start with yourself. Again, remembering what both I and Mary said, that change begins with an individual, with one person, with changes within yourself. What are you doing in your agency right now with respect to adoption that you think is wrong? What are you doing that you think is wrong? Answer that question, agency people, to yourself. Are you perfectly content with the practice that you are now doing in your adoption program in your agency? If not, what is it that you're doing wrong? Now I'm going to ask somebody in the audience to share that. Somebody from an agency. Now, we'll sit here till somebody does. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll have to start out with a little background.
Fine.
I've been doing the post-adoption services for 3.5 years. When I started, I didn't have any experience in that particular phase. So my director said to go slowly, go easily. Then as time went on, we both got more courage. We went a little bit further. And when I say a little bit further, in the beginning we were just giving non-identifying information.
Fine.
And searching for birth parents if the adoptee was asking for that.
Mm-hmm.
We also had inquiries from birth mothers.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually we went into searching for the adoptees.
Good.
But when we ran into trouble, and I say trouble because we had one family with 3 grown children in their early 20s who had not told the children they were adopted. I had 2 birth mothers seeking information about their children in that family. When we contacted the family and they said no, there was no way they wanted any contact, they would maybe think about it and get back with us. They never got back with us.
Mm-hmm.
We sent 3 letters. Then finally, it was a Hispanic family, so we had a Hispanic social worker contact the family on the telephone, and they wanted no part of telling the children. They said, how can we tell them now? We haven't told them for 20-some years. But one of the birth mothers wasn't satisfied. She went to a search organization and found her daughter. It caused a lot of upheaval in the family. The adoptive parents came to the agency actually screaming and crying and threatening to sue the agency.
Mm-hmm.
That was one instance. Another instance, we had a woman come all the way from Canada to find out about her daughter. I called the adoptive family. It was another case. Don't you call here. We don't want to hear anything about that birth family. We want no contact. I asked and this girl was 21, I asked my daughter a year ago if she wanted to search. At that time, she said no. She said, please don't ever call here again. We found out later they wrote a letter to the Archbishop complaining about our agency. So my meeting supervisor got a little scared and said, no more. If the birth mothers call, tell them to write a letter or place it in the file in the event that the child wants contact.
Okay, good. Thank you. What this lady has been kind enough and bold enough to share with us is that what she feels she's doing wrong in her agency is respecting, if you will, the right of the adoptive family to control information to their child throughout that child's growing up years and even beyond adulthood. And, I think it's wrong, and in a sense, most of the agencies that I know are doing that. So that you're in good company or bad company, but we're in the stew together. Good company and bad stew. Absolutely. All right, now my next question is, I'm not going to talk about the rights and wrongs of that. The fact that she feels that it's wrong and I do, we're going to assume that it's not right to do it that way. Now, some may feel that is right, but I absolutely agree with you, it's not right to do it that way. And I have been in that same jam, and within 3 years had the same thing, and had a lawyer call me and say that if we even so much as got to the edge of that family road or did anything, he would, as he said in my words, he said, I'll have your ass in court and your agency on the front page of the paper. So, so that there, but that doesn't mean that I don't think, I didn't say do it. Perhaps I lacked the moral courage, but there are other ways, and I can tell you how we solved it in that case eventually. But the issue here is that this is a worker who's in a moral dilemma, a psychological dilemma. She is itching because she knows she's doing something wrong. The second question that you asked then, why? Well, clearly the why in this instance is that the agency policy, the people above her say we're not going to do it. In my instance, since I could have done it, I could have changed the policy. It was my lack of conviction about my right to go into a family where the child was not yet had not yet reached majority against the adoptive parents' wishes. So I had a psychological problem. Morally, I was committed to it, but I somehow was hung up in the way we'd always done it. Do you follow what I'm saying? And I'm still working on that, but I'm working through it. I'm getting to the point now that children need the information when they need it, and birth parents need a response when they ask for it. This is a developmental process, and that you do not, as an adoptive parent, own your child and own the right to control information that is essential to that child's life. So the timing is still problematic to me, but we're working on this together. All right, then the third question is, what can you do about it? What can you from the inside do about it? What can this lady do? What can a worker? Put yourself in that position. Those of you who are not agency workers, put yourself in that position. What do you do if you find yourself in a situation where you're doing something that you know is wrong and you want to change that something, and you're not the director who can arbitrarily change it, and you're not the judge who can change the law? What do you begin to do? How do you begin to work at this? And again, what has some of your experiences been in terms of changing from within your agency? Those of you in agencies who face this dilemma, not necessarily around this problem, but around any problem, what have you been able to do to bring change about? Yes, please.
Try a piece of it first.
Thank you. Try a piece of it first. Can you talk a little more about that? I'm getting closer so this gets picked up on the other mic.
You might be able to persuade the decision makers in your agency to make a new policy that in placements from now on, applicants will be told that this communication from birth parents will be passed on to their child. If they want to adopt through you, they should know that.
Absolutely. That is a marvelous idea. And you see that makes such good sense, and that's exactly the tactic that the Child Welfare League used. And you realize the Child Welfare League has survived its history by institutionalizing the practices of agencies all over the country. Now, it's hard to be a standard setter, which the Child Welfare League wishes to be, and a protector of agency practice, because they are not compatible. Do you follow? So the League is always, as is any agency, but the League is always in this position. And as a representative of the League, not that I work for them, but I'm a League member agency and I serve as the chair of their adoption task force, people are always saying to me, why is the League taking such a conservative position on this? It's because it is representing a constituency of X hundred agencies, and what always happens is, in order to establish policy, you cannot be avant-garde and keep your constituency. You reach a common denominator, and what is it you say in math? The lowest common denominator. So you preserve the institution by compromising your standard bearing. Now, that's only morally acceptable if you're doing something to change that. You and I can only endure our agencies if we feel we're doing something to change what we think is wrong.
Our agency is doing that, educating adoptive parents.
Beautiful.
Now, but it still doesn't help all those people.
All right. But that's the first step, and I say that's where the League is, because the League now has in writing that they want records open from here on out. That was clearly made, what, 88, I think, when they passed that. Now, they did not go back to clean up the old business. We're still struggling with that, but that's a first step. And that's an important first step, because it may not help you who are searching, but it's going to help those other folks. And that's part of what you have to do. You have to be the prophet. You have to stand for and stand out in the group at some cost to yourself. But that's not enough. So now you want to go back, and how are you going to clean it up? What are you going to do next? And again, following that tactic of a little piece at a time, what are some other thoughts? Either on this issue or another issue. You're going to try a little piece. What else can you do to bring change about in the agency? What else has happened? Please, Sally.
I don't know if it's in the agency, but you could some kind of program, seminar that
Absolutely.
adoptive families could attend.
Absolutely. You now begin to educate those people that are resistant. Now, you may not get that family or the family that called their lawyer on me, but we'll get their neighbors and others who've adopted. Send out letters. I mean, agencies are so reluctant to intrude in the well-being of these families, even when we know that the families are not well-beinged, because they're doing things that we feel so strongly are contrary to what we now believe to be good practice. Send out a letter to the people that have adopted, even to let them know. How many adoptive families that have adopted historically have heard from the agency in the last 10 years a letter reflecting on some of the changes? What they do is they hear it on Oprah and they read it in the paper. And some of that is good and some of that is bad. So it is a live issue, the confidential information, their open rights are live. But how many agencies have written their adoptive families a letter, just an information letter that says, you know, things have changed in adoption since you adopted, and no doubt you followed these changes on Oprah and the Ladies' Home Journal and the New Yorker this week and last week in the New Yorker. How many of you have heard from your agency? How many of you know about these changes? The agency is responding to these changes, etc., etc. That's another very valid technique to begin to educate those people, to begin to let them know that the agency's position has changed, because in effect, you see, we were the allies of the position they now hold. And we can hardly, if we've changed sides, we the agency, we can hardly say, oh, you're on the wrong side, without telling them, hey, we were there, this is why we are now here. Would you like to find out what's happened in an agency, what has happened in adoption that is affecting all of this change? It may be of great importance to you in your own adoptive practice. And we can say to them what Mary said, what I've said, what I hope every adoption worker is saying every chance you get now: there's no such thing as a confidential adoption. And if we promised you confidentiality, we're wrong. And if you think you're going to have it, you're wrong. There's no such thing. The issue is not confidentiality. That's an old issue that we've re-examined and found wanting, A, because it's not possible, and B, because it's not desirable. Let's talk about that. Invite families in and look for opportunities. Agencies that have done adoption have a built-in mailing list of families that we want to influence about changing the way adoption is done, but we're reluctant to contact those folks. We don't want to intrude on those families. Wrong, 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 wrong. Any other ideas dealing with this issue? What are some of the other things agencies can do? Yes?
Educating the agents
How?
by having them come to these conventions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will
I'm from Jacksonville, one of the biggest tourism home societies there are. Never see a representative from the
absolutely. And let me say, I hope this is on the tape. I am distressed that more representatives of my agency did not come to this conference than did. And I am appalled that there are so few representatives from other Chicago agencies here. It's appalling. Now, part of that I have to take responsibility for. I really thought that I was going to have good representation from my agency, and I really thought that I had talked this conference up among my peers, but I obviously did not do the job well. And believe me, it will be done better next time around, because you're absolutely right. Now, let me build on that a moment And that is also, you see, when you work on the inside, and I talked about loyalty on Thursday, and I believe in loyalty. I'm not going to say anything right here that I haven't said in my agency, and I'm not going to say I work for a lousy agency, because I don't. And if you ask me a question and I can't defend my agency, I'm going to say I can't defend that, or I don't want to talk about it. Because it's not my job to damn my agency outside. It's my job to damn my agency from the inside. Not defend my agency from the outside where it's indefensible, but not to attack it. Am I making that clear? Because if I think my agency is so bad, I'd better get out of there. And if I think it's bad and I can change it, then I'd better say all the things I think are bad from the inside, and on the outside say, I'm sorry, we're trying. I can't defend that. But what you can do is build in some pressure from the outside. Now, let me again take this post-legal adoption services thing, because that's a recent case example in my agency. When I realized that my agency was not ready to fund a position for post-legal adoption services, and yet we had developed conceptually what we needed to do. We knew how to do it. Do you understand? It was all, we'd done all the little pieces, but we hadn't funded it as a system. We had the opportunity, because the state of Illinois invited the agency to sell the state a little bit of my time on a special grant to develop a model for this kind of service. And my agency said, hey, some status, some prestige, Ken's time is going to be paid for, sure, why not? Well, of course, what happened then was that another person who was also involved in this, Jean-Pierre Bourguignon, and I worked with Mary Pat Clements from DCFS and a committee and developed a manual on why post-legal adoption services are necessary, what they look like, what the ingredients are. That manual was printed as part of the grant that Mary Pat was on. It's been distributed statewide, nationally. Now, all of a sudden, I'm the co-author of a manual on post-legal adoption services. Well, now that puts my agency in a bit of a funny position, you see? And that's just exactly fine, because that's where I want them. And they're very pleased that the manual's published and think it makes good sense, and I say, yes, but, you know, something is still missing here because we're not doing it. It didn't budge them enough. So the next thing I did was I had been going to AAC conferences, and when the conference came to Chicago, AAC asked Chicago Child Care to be the co-sponsor of that conference. So when I presented that to my board, they said, first of all, what's it going to cost us? That's a legitimate board question. What are the risks? Legitimate board question, you know. And so I explained to them, and I told them what happened in New York, and I said the worst that you could get is some publicity, which may trouble some of you or some of our donors, because in New York, when they ran the red tape around the Roosevelt and made the front pages of the papers, I suspect some agencies were saying, my gosh, is that such and such in that parade, if you will? And I said, you know, I was pictured in those pictures, and my name's there, but that was in New York. It could happen in Chicago, you know. Are you prepared for what some people may perceive as bad publicity? Well, they could handle that. And I said, but what it really is going to do, it's going to identify you foursquare as an agency that believes in open records. And they all nodded, so, yeah, it's okay. But you see, now I have them again, don't you see? I'm closing in on them. From the inside, I'm closing in on the outside, because it becomes more and more difficult for them to defend a position which they have publicly gone on record of opposing. Do you follow what I'm saying? Now, we're in good shape internally, but we're not where we should be, because our agency has not taken the leadership that I would like it to in terms of opening the records in Illinois. It's going to be increasingly difficult for them not to take that position, having been identified on this part. You follow what I'm saying? That's the moving on the outside without being disloyal to the agency. Nobody on my board feels that I have been dishonest with them. They're uncomfortable with some of the things I'm doing, but you know, I'm closing around on them. Yes, Sandy.
I think along that same thing, I find it frustrating as an organization to make any inroads with the agencies, because if I call and talk to them, they give me lip service. Yes, we support what you're about. And 2 years ago, we sent out a one-page form with 5 questions. They only needed to check, do you support open records? What do you consider identifying? What do you consider non-identifying? A self-addressed stamped envelope to return. Out of 63 private agencies in the state of Florida, we got 6 back.
Mhm.
2 of them were non-committal, 2 of them said, no, we don't believe in open records, and 2 of them said they did. I
Yeah,
think that's a very poor showing.
it's terrible. It's terrible. Now, you know what? You have to understand that a research finding that gets a 10% return is not considered bad. It really isn't. But I find that deplorable because you're asking a critical question to critical players in the scene, and you would expect they would want to respond one way or the other, and not just take it, oh, well, one more form to fill out, you know.
It would take them 5 minutes. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
talking just a check mark. That's all they needed to do.
You see, and what that says is there's not the emotional investment in this issue one way or the other, in contrast to the survey that Mary Pat was involved in, where you sent out questionnaires to X number. Tell us quickly what that was and what your return rate was, because it was phenomenal.
Also, 10%, but actually 10% of the universe. There are 4,258 families in Illinois that get adoption subsidy. We're targeting special needs adoption. We picked 1,000 of those families and sent them a survey asking for about the level of need for after adoption services, the level of use last year for one child, and the barriers to service. And we got 400 responses within 17 days.
So the questionnaire universe was only 1,000. So your response on that questionnaire was 40% in 17 days. So that's fantastic. What it tells you, though, doesn't it, is that that issue is something that people wanted to respond to, and that the issue is not something that they wanted to respond to. And that's where we are, that agencies at this point are not that invested in this issue one way or the other, except a few, the 6 in your instance that responded, you know. And that's critical in terms of thinking about change, because that suggests that we have to go back one level to somehow raise the, I hate the term, sensitivity, raise the critical point, what is it, the critical mass, raise the point at which something's going to happen within the agency to make it a significant enough issue within the agency. Now comes the people on the outside. How do you make this a significant enough issue for the agency to take a position on? Either way, you put pressure on them. You put pressure on them. You've got to press the agencies. I'm talking not now to the agency people, but to the non-agency people. You've got to keep the heat on the agency.
How do we do that?
Okay, you've got Open My Records Day. What about, I'm making this up now, and I may rue the day because it'll be my agency that will receive the brunt of this, fine. What about letting your support group, if there is one in your area, having them identify all the people that adopted from a given agency and have those people come in one a day over a period of time? That would drive me crazy. If I had somebody show up or a call every day from somebody asking the same question that I had just answered the day before from somebody else, and not given a good answer, mind you, but at least given an answer, I would be very much distressed. Another person, God, I just had a call about that yesterday, and all of a sudden I'm beginning to feel, you know, what are these people bugging me for? They're bugging me because it's an important issue. I just made that one up. You follow what I'm saying? You've got to generate some way on the outside. I don't know how many people that have been gone to an agency and have been denied service to which you felt you were entitled, feel that there has been any attempt on the agency's part, whether conscious or unconscious, to withhold information from you that you thought you had a legitimate right to. I'm talking about a legal right now. If so, complain to the local National Association of Social Workers and ask them to examine that agency in terms of possibly bringing sanction against them for unethical conduct. I mean, you've got to not be afraid to go after the agency and make them uncomfortable. If I thought the NASW was investigating me, even if I thought my record was clean, I would be upset. I would be upset that somebody had done that. I would then say, gee, it must be important to them. We must not be doing something right. We may be legally right, do you understand? But we're not doing it right, or these people wouldn't have been so upset. You're shaking your head. You don't agree.
My experience has been, not you, but
Yeah.
someone in the position.
It could be me.
Simply think they're dealing with.
Okay.
You know, what we were doing with DCFS is, Finch in Illinois is trying to force them to create open, not force them, but to at least not let them interfere with having children see each other after they're adopted.
Right.
And what's happened is they have dug their heels in a big way, and I mean, the legal staff has.
Yeah.
And they're, I think, trying to talk to social workers too, so
It has only intensified the opposition, is what you're saying. Good point. Good point. You know, you put pressure on somebody, they may bring out the big guns, you know, and the more you press, the bigger their guns are, and sooner or later they got bigger guns than you do. Somebody ends up with a nuclear bomb and you don't got one, and you got to quit. And that's a risk. Again, you need to anticipate what the risks are, and your point is very well made. I don't know how you know when you're going to be able to break through the resistance and when you're going to only reinforce it. Are you following my question? That's what I'm hearing the question here as, isn't it possible that when you put pressure on, you're going to solidify the resistance rather than open up the process? Yes, from the back and real loud, because I'm going to try and pick you up on my little lapel mic.
When I was a support group, and you say put pressure on to an agency,
Yeah.
okay? Who are you putting, who do you suggest we put the pressure on? I'm from Canada, the system is a little bit different.
Sure.
You want information, you phone the receptionist, transfer, you go to the adoption information unit who has a
Sure.
secretary who takes a name and a number.
Right.
What is it about? You can't go up to the executive director because you have to get through 16 levels.
Okay.
Who do you suggest that if you're beginning with,
Right.
who should not attack?
Who do you put pressure on? All right. Again, remembering my conditions of bringing about change is you want to find your allies as far up in the process as you can. Now there are two parts, or there are more than two, but we're talking about two different approaches. One is a confrontive approach, which we're talking about now, and the other is an alliance approach. And they can go on at the same time. But let's finish the confrontative one. What you need to remember is the higher up your message gets through to, the more the pressure will be. So that, and this is just somebody else jump in. My approach to that would be to write a letter to the person I talked to, whether it was a receptionist or whoever. Get that person's name, and I would copy it all the way up the line to the head of the agency or to the director. And I would be polite. I would say, you know, when I called the other day, I appreciated your response to my telephone response, and but I was confused because I didn't feel like my message was getting across or whatever it was, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm copying this letter to everybody in the system because I think maybe it's a system problem that needs to be addressed. That's just an idea. I don't know where the pressure is going to work. The director is going to say, take care of this to the guy below him, you know, and it's going to be handled routinely. It's like when you write a letter to President Bush, he never sees your letter. Fine, you know, it's handled by whatever DCF. If a letter goes to Gordon Johnson, the chances are he never reads it, or if he does, it's answered somewhere along the way. Mary Pat.
Each state has an adoption specialist in addition. So that's the thing to find out.
Excellent.
So it's a matter of the organization finding out the infrastructure of the agency.
Yeah, but Mary Pat's point is a very good one, which I had overlooked. It is. I don't want to lose that. Excuse me for cutting you off. I get carried away with this. It is a matter of the outsiders finding out the structure of the agency and using that structure in your behalf. But Pat makes an interesting point that in every state, all 50 states, there is an adoption specialist that is somehow a publicly funded, supported position within the state bureaucracy who is responsible for that state's public adoption program. And since adoption programs are state governed, and since in most states the state public agency has a burden of responsibility or a lot of responsibility, that person is in a very critical position in terms of knowledge of the state and resources, and in terms of needing to know where the prickly points are. Do you follow? So that each person representing a support group or each person wishing to make change should find out who the adoption representative, what are they officially called, Mary Pat?
State adoption specialist.
All right. Now how many people in support groups that are here now, or how many people who are not social work professionals, let me put it that way. Social work professionals, sit on your hands and bite your tongues, including me, that's hard for us. How many other people knew there was a state adoption specialist? How many know who your state adoption specialist is? Keep them up. Knew her name once. 33 years it may have changed. I'm teasing you. But see, this is, all right, fine. The rest of you don't and should. You better know that. How about getting acquainted with that person? And if you're an individual and that person won't have lunch or dinner with you, how about inviting that person to a support group meeting? How about making some personal contact with that person whose schedule is going to be so busy and so tied up with the bureaucracy, they're going to say, oh, these people are a pain in the neck. Pressure, pressure, pressure. I mean, how many invitations is this person going to refuse before it's easier to see them than to not see them? Do you follow what I'm saying? You and then you. Yes, please. I don't mean to be youing, but...
I happen to just fall into this person by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a letter to the new governor of the state of Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
We had an election and there was a new governor. And I had seen that there was a bill in Florida that they were going to set up a panel and that there would be an adoptee on this panel. And so I referred to that bill and I wrote the letter to the governor. So my letter went to this appointed person.
Right.
Somehow or another, she hadn't actually seen my letter. It had been misplaced.
Mm-hmm.
It had been referred to her. So in my conversation, she called me direct, long distance. And she was very nice. She was wasn't sure what my interest was. But I gave up on her when she said to me, and I don't mean to sound facetious if there's any adopted parents in here, but she said, oh, I think those adopted parents are just wonderful to take these little kids. And I thought, I'm not going to get anywhere with this woman, to get on a panel or to put my cause across.
Mm-hmm.
But one other way that I think that those of us in the triad can maybe get to the agencies in a different way is they always have fundraisers and parties, cocktail parties, ski trips, whatever. Somebody should go to those, especially if it's your own agency, if you were adopted out of that agency. Just go like you belong. They may let you know that you really don't belong there, but because I've been
Fine. Sure.
told that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And you were going to comment. Okay. You are meeting now, when? Before you march, or? At the end of the march, the adoption specialist is going to be in Washington and you're going to meet with that person. Good. Good. Yes?
Again, you have to do as this lady did, find out the posture of that person real quickly.
Sure.
In Wisconsin, that's one of our biggest adversaries.
Absolutely. Okay, now let me make that point. I hinted at it a minute ago. And this is sort of thing, I love the comment, I don't know whose it is. I think it's Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think he said, the sign of a mature mind is to be able to hold two contradictory opinions at the same time. I think in working with this, to be a mature activist, you've got to be able to work right hand and left hand, right brain, left brain, at the same time, even though it doesn't always seem to quite fit together. So at the same time you are being confrontational, you're pressing, you're looking for ways to push the agency, simultaneously you're looking for ways to make alliances. And they are not contradictory. I mean, they are contradictory, but they're not mutually exclusive. Do you follow what I'm saying? And in effect, sometimes people will make an alliance because they're tired of the confrontation. If you can't, you can't beat them, join them. I mean, there's some merit to that. So that we need to be looking within agency for where your friends are. Now, if you are concerned about an agency and getting through or making change, is there anybody in that agency that you know of who has any sort of a sympathetic position sympathetic tie to what you're saying? And can you find that out? Is there somebody there who is in your support group who is adopted from that agency recently? What has been their experience? What was their social worker? All you need is a little chink. If a social worker says, well, you know, the records are still closed and I wish they weren't, but they are, that's a social worker that you want to try and get contact with in that agency. Are you following what I'm saying? You're looking for your allies at the same time you're formulating your ways of confronting. Because ultimately you're going to make what I call fragile coalitions. I think change comes about through fragile coalitions. And the reason they're fragile is because you form a coalition around one little tiny piece of common ground. And it is unrealistic to expect that you're going to share a lot else in common with that person. And you don't have to. If that person and you can keep your focus on that ground and you can share the commitment to getting that goal accomplished, then you don't really have to worry about whether that coalition is going to exist beyond that. But you may in terms of yourself, and you may in terms of your own future, or an organization such as AAC may worry and wonder, as I do, and as I think we all should, about what comes next. But right now, the goal is to open records. Who is it within that agency that you feel is sympathetic to that cause? And then you begin to work from the outside. How can I help you? Because that becomes the next question, I think, is when you, from either the inside or the outside. We started from the inside. What are you doing now that you don't agree with is wrong? What can you do about it? And then the question is, who can help me bring about this change? And from either the inside or the outside, and what is it that we can do together? Now, I'm not clear what all the things are doing. I need allies on the outside to change my agency. They need allies on the inside to change what we're doing. Do you follow how that alliance gets formed? Now, a lot of people that become my allies for a particular moment or on a particular project are not people I would like to spend the rest of my life with. I'm not marrying them. They're not people that I might even enjoy socially, but they are people who share with me a conviction about a certain issue, and as long as we have that shared, and as long as that's our focus, we are able to get along just fine. So you don't have to agree with everything that anybody says. Now, I suppose the person that we, in this room, most of us, would have the least in common with, I can only speak for myself, is Bill Pierce. Now, Bill and I have known each other for a long time, and we share very, very little in common. I would not refuse to form an alliance with him around an issue, provided I could believe him or anybody else, you know. And so that the fact that we disagree on most every issue, if we could find something on which we agreed that was important to both of us, then I would form a fragile coalition with Bill Pierce. For the most part, I doubt that we would be able to do that, but perhaps there are areas in which we agree. If I found them, and if it was important to me and important to him, and I could believe, I could trust that there wasn't some hidden agenda, or that the hidden agenda was not so hidden, I knew what it was, then you could form that coalition. Now that, to me, is not a compromise in terms of my integrity, because I am very clear what I'm pursuing, and I'm very clear that for the most part, whoever my ally is may not be in agreement, but for the pursuit of that object, I will form a fragile coalition. Now, you know, again, it's a moral choice. There may be some people that you wouldn't be seen dead with. Fine. Fine. You have to make that choice. How important is it to accomplish this? How much can this person do to help you accomplish it? What is the price that you may have to give up in terms of your image, in terms of your integrity? And you make your own moral choices. And there are some people that I would not form a coalition with. I'm not sure about Bill Pierce, but at least my mind is open to that. Yes. Thank you.
I'm an agency social worker, and I would like to support what you're saying about forming an alliance with somebody in an agency. I have found, at least in Cleveland area where I work, and maybe in Ohio, that often in agencies there's maybe a solitary person providing the non-identifying information, or working on post-finalization services. It's a new area of the post-finalization services anyway. So often we're very isolated, and being very isolated, we don't always know what our boundaries are. And I basically, I think, was a very sympathetic person to the cause, but really had no opportunity, did not know of the AAC until just a couple of years ago. And when a group started in Cleveland, the Adoption Network, and I became involved with that group, it empowered me to reinforce my own instincts and my own beliefs, and empowered me to get involved in the cause more, in a stronger way. I think I also hopefully helped to empower the Adoption Network support group. And I believe that I have access maybe to other adoption professionals throughout the state of Ohio that I can champion the cause. And I really think it has, it's a real important connection for me and for the support group. And I can see that really beginning to work in the past year. So I support that.
I like that, and I'd like to broaden it to the point when support groups think of support, they need to think of other people who need support in the adoption, and social workers can be feeling very alone in their agency if they're holding a position which is contrary to traditional social work thinking or questioned by the agency within which they work, and they can draw enormous support from your support group in terms of what they're trying to do. And I think the support group, again, can get some feeling of increased empowerment and also support of knowing you've got somebody on the inside that thinks as do you. So there's a very important power, exchange of power that goes on back and forth as we begin to work more closely together. Thank you for sharing that.
Another brief comment would
Good.
be, with public agencies, if you want to get to the right people, sometimes the public agencies are responsible to elected officials. And if you contact those, I know when somebody writes to our county commissioners about something that's going on in our agency, believe me, all the way down the line,
Sure.
hears about it.
Right, right.
Get letters back when who writes to the president.
Loud.
Who writes to the president or a federal official, and that funnels back in through the top.
Sure.
And comes down and gets
Sure.
delegated, and hopefully eventually gets delegated to the
Yeah, and even if it doesn't reach that person, it's a little discouraging to write a letter to the governor and to get a letter signed that's been done on the Xerox, if you will, the old mouse in the Coke theory. Somebody writes in that they opened a bottle of Coke and there was a mouse in it, and that they send a letter to Coke, and Coke says, oh, pull another mouse in the Coke bottle letter. You sort of get the idea that when the complaint comes in, it's grinded off, take a letter off the right pile, and some of us, no doubt you, it has happened to me, have gotten a letter from the wrong pile. I have written to a representative complaining about something and got a letter back, thank you for your support. They pulled the wrong, that's discouraging. But we mustn't let that deter us, because somebody is counting the number of letters, somebody's keeping track of how often they have to re-Xerox the replies. It has some impact, even as trivial as that. If they have a pile of 1,000 letters to send out to all those crazy adopted people that want records open, and that pile of letters took a year to go through last year, and took 6 months to go through this year, and took 3 months to go through. There's a message coming through all the time. So I think we don't want to ever underestimate the impact that we may be having as we impact on any little piece of the system. Please.
If I remember correctly, Mary
Mhm.
just now made the comment that her MP somewhat discounted letters that were
Right.
photocopies
Right.
with a variety of people signing them. And I think I remember yours saying on Thursday
I did.
that even if it's the same letter, it's
Sure.
how do we reconcile? Or
Hey.
they count them as they put them into the certain
See,
file.
yeah, exactly. I think you reconcile it. There's no question but that a personal letter, which is different from the others, carries more impact. No question about it. But it is also true, and I've heard this from representatives, if they get 1,000 and they are all signed differently, and they come from a different spot, that still has some impact. Now, if you have 1,000 and they're all signed, I remember at Child Welfare League conference 2 years ago, they had a postcard in everybody's seat. And there were 800 people at the conference, and before you got out the door, you had to sign your name to the postcard and hand it. And it was a form postcard. But it's still going to have some impact to realize that I don't care whether it's 800 people, if they all agree, it's like names on a petition. It's not as good as an individual letter, but it's still a vote. And that's what they end up counting is votes. No question the individual letter has more power. But I would not say for that reason don't worry about mass letter mailings, because every letter is a vote. Now, you can't put them all in the mail yourself, obviously. I mean, they can be mass letters, but they need to come from different individuals. Please.
I just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks.
California recently with the AB 30, got the number, 3907.
Right.
3907 for everybody that knows California.
Right, when we went to Sacramento, before we went up there, we had all our club members, all of us
Good.
had all of our friends. It was the same letter. And when we went through to each one of those assembly people, they said, we know that, Bill, because we've got numerous
There you go.
letters and calls.
Yeah.
None of them were personally written. They
Yeah.
were all.
Sure.
So
So
it had an impact.
don't sell it short. I mean, again, it's like even if they throw them away and the wastebasket fills too quickly, it has an impact. I just emptied that damn wastebasket yesterday. What's going on here? It has impact. Somebody, yes, please.
One thing is I'm a lawyer, and so
Can't hold that against you.
my perspective is clearly skewed in a lot of ways. But I think that lawyers are important in the process. These are laws we're talking about
Absolutely.
most of the time. And I think that lawyers who represent the agencies are sometimes the most conservative in terms of keeping this stuff very quiet and keeping any movement from happening. But also lawyers are in, and many of the lawyers for the agencies are in bar associations. The American Bar Association, the local bar association. I think their positions on these issues are important. And as I think as members of support groups, you may have more opportunity to lobby bar associations or speak with them as social workers. You may have a more opportunity to speak to individual
Good.
lawyers in agency, but anyway.
Good point. There are at least two lawyers in this audience. I know, because I know one other besides you now. There may be more than two, but let me just say about lawyers, and with my large sample of two, you've heard me say I will generalize from a sample of one. So a sample of two is a luxury. Let me do a little poll with the lawyers present, if they will be so kind. A third lawyer, who's a lawyer that I know, says that social workers are too afraid of something being illegal. The fact that it is illegal and that you can be sued does not necessarily mean that you will be or that you will lose, and that sometimes when things are illegal, social workers say, well, I wouldn't do that, it's against the law. Let's take the issue of revealing confidential or identifying information. One wants to be careful, I think, that one does not set up litigation that one is going to lose, knowingly set that up, because it establishes precedent. On the other hand, based on the support of this lawyer, he says when you're doing something that is extra legal, outside the boundaries of the law, still somebody has to bring action against you. Do you follow what I'm saying? And the fact that it's illegal, it puts the onus on the other person, the burden on the other person to do something, and that many people, even though they know you're breaking the law, are not that concerned about doing something. Do you follow what I'm saying? I'm not saying it very articulately. Now, either of the lawyers want to comment on that. Does that seem reasonable for you, that agencies sometimes are too conservative in taking risks around legal issues? Yeah.
I guess I would never want to tell someone to
Break the law.
break the law.
I understand. You can't. I understand.
But along those lines, and it really disturbs me, and lawyers do this as well as social workers sometimes don't, is they say that certain things are illegal.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, as you say, they're either extra legal or they're perfectly within the bounds of the law, but things have not been done that way. I think in these areas, I should say, I work with abused and neglected kids, who are wards of the state usually. Things go as they have been done in the past, and people confuse that with what is
law.
legal and what is required by the law.
Good.
And the only thing that bothers me more than social workers or caseworkers telling clients what the law is, or telling me what the law is, is other lawyers telling me that something is illegal when in fact it's either very legal or it just has not been, tested yet.
That says a lot more clearly what I think I was trying to say. Thank you very much for that. Cindy?
I think it's just simply a matter that agencies use that to hide the
Absolutely.
because of their own biases. There's always ways around the law.
Absolutely.
The social worker really wants to
Absolutely.
They
And,
definitely are.
and
And when they decide to go to the legislators in mass, this system will be changed overnight. And that's my premise,
Sure.
that the social workers are going to change it when they're ready to change it.
Sure.
Because they're the ones that created the law in the first place.
that's absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And you see, again, that when a social worker tells you, when you've gone to the agency, that that's against the law, what law? Well, it's against state rules and regulations and policies. Which one? Well, it's against this agency's policy. Which one? And when they finally pin down what it is, why and what can I do to help you change it?
I'm worried about the law, the
Yeah.
agency.
Yeah.
In my case, I'm so worried about the law. I've heard that a dozen times, but I get 2 sheets of non-identified
Defying information.
information from the same home from 2 different social workers, and they're as different as day and night. I have a red-headed mother and a black-headed mother.
That is
I have a college graduate and I have a...
That is so sad.
What's against the law?
That is so sad. I am sorry to hear that, only because it confirms what I know happens, and I hate it. I hate it. I don't mind being held accountable for the mistakes I made 20 years ago when I saw things differently. But there's no excuse for people giving you faulty information. And intentionally. There is just no excuse for that. Now, that's the kind of situation that I would like. I can't say this as a member of NASW, but I would like somebody to bring a complaint against the agency. Thank you. You should. Yes. Oh, excuse me, I've got to go over here because I promised him and I lost my way. You're next.
Well, I'm one of those closet lawyers here.
Aha. So there were 3 and I only knew 2. Now, anybody else that wants to identify themselves as a lawyer can, but they don't have to 4. All right, go ahead.
That idea you were expressing about not being so afraid,
Yeah.
about being on the edge
Right.
of something, I heard it expressed this way. Incidents do not bring lawsuits, people do.
Thank you.
And if you manage the people well in the situation, you can avoid being sued.
Yes. Thank you. Well, that's very good. And I have another case, and this because some of my best friends are lawyers, so it's all right. But and sometimes you can get some reinforcement from a lawyer. Now, I called quivering and got reinforced. There was a young man who was caught up in DCFS and who shouldn't have been, and ran away from DCFS and ran to his family. That says something about how well the system was working, doesn't it? When this 16-year-old child ran away from his foster home and ran home, and then the family moved to California. Now, it was not a functional family, but it was his way out of the system. Once in California at 16, he called me and said, I'm coming back to Chicago because my family's not going to work, but I don't want to get caught up in DCFS and go to another foster home. And he said, can you meet me at the airplane and help me get established? Now, he's 16 years old. And help me get established. I'll have a little money, but I'll have trouble getting a room as a 16-year-old. And I have to worry about school and all those things. Can you help me? Well, I knew the history of this child. And this was an enormous step in terms of his own development and was, in my mind, exactly what he ought to be doing. He ought not go back into DCFS, and he ought not stay in his dysfunctional family. But he was also a minor child, and I was going to say I'd meet him at the airport when he flew in from California and help establish himself and not report him to DCFS as a runaway. They could care less. To the Chicago school system as a truant who needed him. But these were my anxieties. So I called a lawyer friend of mine and said, this is a situation, can you advise me? He says, as your lawyer, I would advise you that if you get involved, you take a certain amount of risk, that you will be violating the law, this, that, and the other. And he paused, and I'm quoting. He says, as your friend, I will never speak to you again unless you do it, and I will represent you if you do it. Now, that's the sort of thing, you see. So that's the sort of courage that we can generate, and it's a matter of working out again our alliances. Now, his family was only too glad to get rid of him. Do you follow me? There was nobody pressed me, but I was scared. And when we're scared, sometimes we don't know when. We go to the lawyers, and sometimes we get bad advice, sometimes we get good advice. You were going to say something. I cut you off.
I have a question. Do state rules and regulations on implementation of a law, if you think
they're inconsistent with the law, do they have force of law?
Yes, they do. In most states, I can't speak generically. The question is, do rules and regulations have the force of law? In most states, they do. But if they are contradictory to the law, then you have some course of action of bringing pressure to, because it says, I think Mary said this morning, once you've got the law, then the implementation comes. And the implementation is not decided by the legislature. It's decided by the bureaucrats. It's decided by somebody who's assigned. Oh, God, we've got to have an Open Records Act. Would you write one for us, please? You know, that's the way it once written, it does have the force of law. But that, if it's contradictory to the intent of law, you have legal recourse. And what you need to do once a law is passed, and this is what Mary was saying and said it so well, don't ever say, oh boy, now we've got to get in there, because when those rules and regulations are written, that's going to define how that law is interpreted and implemented, not the court test. That will come later. Right now, you need to be in there getting that implementation written in a way that you can live with. Somebody over here had their hand or comment. Sally, go ahead first.
There were a couple of thoughts that came to my mind that, you know, and the question, how can you as a staff person address the problem that always gets thrown to you, oh, we get that illegal.
Right.
That's a very blanket comment that strikes fear in the normal person.
Right.
However, there are a couple of sort of subtopics that you can look at within that comment. First of all is, who has standing to bring a suit against you? Are we talking civil damages?
Right.
A private action by an adopted family based on some statute? I don't think there are too many statutes on the books
Right.
that give an adopted family or a member of the triad the same standing to sue. That's number one. Number two, are we talking criminal penalties, or are we talking about simply certain activities as being a basis for your state licensing agency lifting their license? So there are many.
A lot of different levels.
Yeah.
Good.
About what the effect
Yeah.
in terms of the risk.
Right.
that
Good.
you're addressing are. And number two is, where is that threat going to come from? Is it going to come from the state? Is it from your regulatory body? Is it a criminal prosecution? Where is your risk coming from? That defines
Sure.
what.
And I think, as I said, thank you, as I said Thursday too, I think individual social workers have to make their own decision as to what risks they're willing to take, both as agency representatives and as individuals. Now, you know, I do not urge other people to break the law. I am quite open that on occasion I break the law if I'm working with a client and they need confidential identifying information and I have that information. I will say, I'm going to share this with you. In doing so, I'm breaking the law, and you may be breaking the law in accepting this. I don't know that. I'm not a lawyer. But, you know, I'm trying to make them an ally in what we're doing, and that I'm doing that because we agree this is in your best interest. Now, you know, if I break the law, nobody ever, you know, I'm not going to get sued. I'm not going to get hauled to court for that. You know, I mean, I don't think I am. You understand? I can't urge you to do that. And I tell my staff, I said, you know what the law is? If you break the law, the agency will not support you in doing that. That is your decision. Don't expect me to back you up if you break the law. If you break the law, I think you have to identify for the client that you are doing that. And third, you have to be willing to take the consequences, and you make your own decision. And I don't ask my workers whether, and what this does do, however, is generate some unevenness. Somebody will say, but I talked to Mrs. Such and she said it was against the law. I talked to Miss Such, and she gave me the information. That's just fine. That's just fine. They'll say, you're inconsistent in your agency. I say, yes, we are. Help us become more consistent. What can we do? It generates, again, some of the foment that I want in order to bring about change. You're next, I think.
The agency, I would just like to have you maybe consider, if you want to make a change, if you would maybe just consider the risk of, at the time of adoption, to the adoptive parent, if you would let them know that, because at that time you never know what will change in years to come, if they would want to come back to you and get information for their child.
Right.
I think this is really crucial as an adoptive parent to be able to go to the agency and ask them, and you know, the time of reunion or to get information for that child might even be at the age of 8, 9,
Thank
10,
you.
11.
Absolutely.
I could have certainly used it. I would have enjoyed it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm brokenhearted because I haven't been able to
Yeah.
have that.
I know. And you see, and I think one of the things agencies can do right now, I don't think it requires any change of policy, law, or anything, I'm going back to your earlier point, is to make sure that every person we work with knows where we stand and what we anticipate will happen. And we know that for children in adoption, they may want information, or their adoptive parents may want that along the way. So we build that in from the start. Come back. We tell the birth parents. We know what, we build into what we're doing now. If we can't do, quotes, fully open adoptions, or we're not doing them, we can build in now mechanisms in which the agency sanctions and encourages and supports communication along the way. And if that's against your agency policy, and I suspect there is no policy for it, if there is, change it. If there isn't, don't build the policy until you get the practice in. Do that a few times and then say, this is the way we're doing it. Sometimes policy precedes practice, sometimes practice precedes policy. And again, one of the ways to affect change in agencies is to begin doing something. If there's no policy against it, don't ask for a policy. Just start doing it the way you think it ought to be doing. Find your allies, and if enough people are doing that, then you say, well, gee, this isn't in policy, but this is the way we're doing it. And we've been doing it this way for X months or something. If you need a policy, then fine. The policy comes out of practicing what you're doing right. Yes?
A friend of mine says it's much easier to seek forgiveness than it is permission.
That's good. Well, you've got lots of good things. Keep coming. Anybody else have a question? Yes, please, comment.
One area that was a real surprise to me into a new position of post-adoption services with a private agency, the contributing members that support the agencies and our salaries are the adoptive parents. So because the adoptive parents have not been educated in this particular area very much on the openness, need for openness, then they don't want to rock the boat.
That's right.
If they rock the boat, they lose the money.
That's right.
And it's
Yeah.
really frustrating.
It is. And, two things occur to me. One is to broaden your base of support, clearly, and the other is to begin to educate some of those adoptive parents. Part of the way that education, I think, comes about, and this may not be everybody's technique, but one of the advantages of being in an agency as long as I have is that I have been everybody's ally at some point or another in all the things we're doing wrong. And the fact that the records were closed was essentially an alliance between adoptive parents and social workers. We closed those records. Out of benign intentions, I think, I'm the same person now that I was then. I was not a bad person then. I don't think I'm a bad person now. I did not intend to hurt people. It's what I believed was right. It was wrong, 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 wrong. I can go to my adoptive constituency and say, hey, remember when we did this? Let's talk about it, because I'm not there anymore, and I can show you why this was the wrong thing to do so we can move together to something that is better. Somebody else? Yes. Linda.
I have an issue I would like to bring up, I think
Please.
possibly for the first time, just for you to think about it, and then maybe next year we can maybe have a workshop on it.
Good.
What would be the social worker's policy on contacting a birth mother when she knows, when the agency knows, that that child has died?
Mm-hmm.
And there has been no contact from the birth mother?
Good. Good.
I've been
That's-
told they will, but I don't.
That's a fascinating question. Let me repeat it because I want it on the tape. A birth mother has surrendered her child. There's been no contact between birth mother and agency or birth mother and adoptive family. Let me complicate it. There's been no contact between the agency and the adoptive family until some point X number of years later. Let's make it 11. And the child is now 12 years old, and the adoptive family sends the agency a letter, a note saying, June, who was adopted from your time, died, and this is the way we sometimes get them. This is a memorial for a contribution, or we're establishing a fund, and instead of flowers, send contribution. And so we will learn that. The question is, does the agency have a moral responsibility? Is it psychologically valid? Is it appropriate? All those questions for the agency then to recontact the birth mother to share that piece of information? That is a marvelous, marvelous question. I'm not going to entertain an answer to that right now because that will keep us busy.
I have been wrestling with
All right.
that myself
All right.
since 1984 when I learned of an adoptee's
Sure.
death.
And I'm not going to open that up right now because we've got about 3 or 4 minutes, and that's I appreciate your suggesting that for the future because you sense, as do I, that would plunge us into something that would consume more than the 3 or 4 minutes we've got left. Thank you so much. Yes.
You talked about the closed walls or the sealed records.
Right.
Are the agency's records sealed?
Yeah, you see the law, and again, I can only speak from what I understand is the interpretation of the Illinois law. And that is that when we talk about adoption records, we're talking both about court records and agency records, and that the information that I as a social worker can legally give is only non-identifying information. Now, I don't think in this group I told you about how agencies sometimes maneuver with that non-identifying information either. If I said this, I don't think I said this Thursday, but if you ask what non-identifying information is, the agency has to make its own decision. Because what is non-identifying for one party may not be for another. And so the agency has some flexibility, which is both good in terms of obeying the law and bad in terms of keeping information away from you. Do you follow what I'm saying? Now, ordinarily, you would assume that profession, that relative age, and that ethnic background of the parent would not be identifying information. But if someone came to me and I said, well, I can give you that information. Your birth father was of Hungarian extraction, he's in his mid-60s, and his profession is symphony orchestra conductor, and he lives in Chicago, that's Sir George Schulte. You know, I've identified the person by the non-identifying information. But you see, agencies sometimes use that. I think from an agency's point of view, you're in a bit of a bind because you do want to respect the law. And if I gave that information for some people, I would be, in a sense, breaking the law or running the risk of that. On the other hand, I can also use that to keep information from you. You know, and I'm going to stop with this.